Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing some very deep problems in the human experiment right now, currently leading to extinction, mass extinction, not just of human beings, but most life on Earth. Excuse me. And the big problem is that, if we were just simply animals on this planet or living in an ecosystem as other animals do, subject to, natural selection and whatever other forces in an ecosystem, controls our actions, our population, our, how we interact with other species, et cetera, et cetera. If we were living in the natural world and the wild, none of this would really be relevant. Obviously, human beings are quite different, and we supposedly can control ourselves or have control over our domain. We have dominion over the earth, as the Bible states somewhere in there. So we have all these technologies. We have big brains. We have, weapons and agriculture and ways in which we keep ourselves above the natural order of the world. We can protect ourselves or, keep ourselves at distance from, the forces that otherwise direct the lives of other animals. And we have, so we have so much control, but yet we cannot control so much of what we do. And that is the great irony of our intelligence. And, possibly we could get better. Possibly we can do better. Can we do better in time? That is the question. We're obviously not going to move the needle on that big question, on those big questions, in these videos necessarily, but we can try. We can, start the conversation. There's a march going on right now against gun violence. I hope that this is a good catharsis for people. I hope that, I hope that people making their voices heard brings some kind of community and strength to those that wish to better the world. I don't think it's going to do one thing to change any policy or any actions the government might take, or, we're too deeply entrenched. And, as history has shown, it's been very, it's very difficult for protests and march, especially in these days, to do much of anything, as I'm sorry if that's not very hopeful, but it's just kind of the truth of it. You really have to go out and disrupt business as usual to really make any impact. And having a march on a Saturday morning, which actually just turns into a kind of a capitalist venture. You have everybody like, getting in lifts and Ubers and, buying coffee and drinks and just, people probably selling t-shirts and, um, it's kind of a party. But I wish them well. If we really wanted to do something about, also a lot of these, I don't know, a lot of the issues, marches, whatever, kind of start centering on these little mini, like let's ban assault weapons or bump stocks or blah 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 blah. When the whole all-encompassing issue of why is it that people are so violent and enamored of violence and enamored of the need to create violent atmospheres? Why is this happening? Why is this going on? Why are we so into this culture of guns and protecting ourselves against the bad guys and blah blah blah? Obviously we all know most of the answers to that. But if you really want to take down gun violence, here are some things you can do besides marching. You can vote. Don't vote for any Republican ever, because they all support the NRA and they all take money from the NRA. And so if you really, really, really want to do that, stop supporting the NRA, stop supporting Republicans, stop supporting any Democrats that might take money from the NRA. That's a good place to start. Obviously lobbying by the NRA is a bad thing. Did you know this, though, that Trump actually signed a bill banning politicians from lobbying or becoming part of lobbying groups for 5 years or something like that after they're out of office? I don't know. He enacted some kind of lobbying ban that was very interesting and actually quite helpful. So while he's, destroying and making mayhem in other places, once in a while he actually does, something cool. You can also not buy guns. You can also not be part of the culture. You can take yourself out of the culture. If you know somebody who has a gun, you can have conversations with them as to why they need guns. What's the point and what's the purpose? Have conversations about how dangerous it is to have guns around. How guns end up usually killing innocent people, or guns usually end up killing family members, or if somebody actually is coming at you, how often you can be killed with your own weapon. What else? If the police are coming at you, don't have a weapon, because you're going to die. It's just, there's so many reasons why having a gun is so incredibly stupid. And if you just really want to have a gun and go hunting and, whatever, feel like you're a badass because you have a gun, that's a whole other psychological problem that possibly you have to deal with. But on a societal level, we don't need guns. We're not, if all the people at all these rallies, march for our lives, all had guns. Oh, now there's a statement. Obviously it wouldn't go very far and it wouldn't last very long. But that's not how these things happen. That's not how change happens. In the last century, how change happens is generally a lot of people get together and disrupt business as usual. And they usually don't have arms. They usually don't have guns, because they know what a suicide mission that is, to actually have a gun, to bring a gun to a rally or a protest, and if you do bring a gun, or if you do try and do some kind of violence in that setting, you're not going to be around for very long. So, so much for your Second Amendment rights. Rambling rant, long rambling rant. I didn't want it to be so long and so rambling, but just in closing that thought, there has to be a whole other conversations about why it is we actually even need to be, why we actually need to have so much violence in our lives. Peace starts with peace. Peace is not, peace through strength is bullshit. Let's move on to some climate news. So, I've said a few times, quite a few times, that, you know, for the people on here who are denying the mechanism of climate change, or greenhouse gases are causing the planet to warm, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If people want to debate that point, which is not a very good one, by the way, even if you want to take out the mechanism of global warming or greenhouse gases causing warming and causing environmental destruction, if you just if you take that whole equation out and you just look at the destruction that humans are doing to the planet, just the destruction and the pollution, that alone is a serious enough problem to take us out. Because we have already caused major, major damage to the earth, and we're continuing to do so at an ever quickening pace. And here's an article from the Guardian from March 23rd, 2018, Jonathan Watts. Destruction of nature as dangerous as climate change, scientists warn. Unsustainable exploitation of the natural world threatens food and water security of billions of people. Major UN-backed biodiversity study reveals. Human destruction of nature is rapidly eroding the world's capacity to provide food, water, and security to billions of people, according to the most comprehensive biodiversity study in more than a decade. Such is the rate of decline that the risks posed by biodiversity loss should be considered on the same scale as those of climate change, noted the authors of the UN-backed report, which was released in Medellin, Colombia on Friday. Among the standout findings are that exploitable fisheries in the world's most populous region, the Asia Pacific, are on course to decline to zero by 2048. That freshwater availability in the Americas has halved since the 1950s, and that 42% of land species in Europe have declined in the past decade. Underscoring the grim trends, this report was released in the week that the decimation of French bird populations was revealed, as well as the death of the last male northern white rhinoceros, leaving the species only 2 females from extinction. The time for action was yesterday or the day before, said Robert Watson, the chair of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. I'm beginning to really loathe the ecosystem services phrase, which compiled the research. Governments recognize we have a problem. Now we need action. But unfortunately, the action we have now is not at the level we need. We must act to halt and reverse the unsustainable use of nature, or risk not only the future we want, but even the lives we currently lead, he added. Divided into 4 regional reports, the study of studies has been written by more than 550 experts from over 100 countries and taken 3 years to complete. Approved by the governments of 129 members nations, the IPBES reports aim to provide a knowledge base for global action on biodiversity in much the same way that the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is used by policymakers to set carbon emission targets. Oh, and they're setting those targets. Although poaching often grabs the headlines for the demise of the rhino and other animals worldwide, the biggest threats to nature are from habitat loss, invasive species, chemicals, and climate change. Conversion of forests to croplands and wetlands to shrimp farms has fed a human population that has more than doubled since the 1960s, but at a devastating cost to other species, such as pollinating insects and oxygen-producing plants, on which our climate, economy, and well-being depend. In the Americas, more than 95% of high-grass prairies have been transformed into farms, along with 72% of dry forests and 88% of Atlantic forests, notes the report. The Amazon rainforest is still mostly intact, but it is rapidly diminishing and degrading, along with even faster disappearing Cerrado tropical savanna. Between 2003 and 2013, the area under cultivation in Brazil's northeast agricultural frontier more than doubled to 2.5 million hectares, according to the report. The world has lost over 130 million hectares of rainforest since 1990, and we lose dozens of species every day, pushing the Earth's ecological system to its limit, said Akim Steiner, administrator of the UN Development Program. Biodiversity and the ecosystem services it supports are not only the foundation for our life on Earth, but critical to the livelihoods and well-being of people everywhere. The rate of decline is moreover accelerating. In the Americas, which is about 40% of the world's remaining biodiversity, the regional population is gobbling up resources at twice the rate of the global average. Despite having 13% of the people on the planet, it is using a quarter of the resources, said Jake Rice, a co-chair of the Americas Assessment. Since the start of colonization by Europeans 500 years ago, he said 30% of biodiversity has been lost in the region. This will rise to 40% in the next 10 years under policies and behaviors, unless policies and behaviors are transformed. It will take fundamental change in how we live as individuals, communities, and corporations, he said. We keep making choices to borrow from the future to live well today. We need a different way of thinking about economics, with a higher accountability of the costs in the future to the benefits we take today, Rice said. It's because of us, added Mark Rounsevell, co-chair of the European Assessment. We are responsible for all the declines in biodiversity. We need to decouple economic growth from degradation of nature. We need to measure wealth beyond economic indicators. GDP only goes so far. That's an excellent assessment. The authors stressed the close connection between climate change and biodiversity loss, which are adversely affecting each other. By 2050, they believe climate change could replace land conversion as the main driver of extinction. So it is not yet the main driver. In many regions, the report says current biodiversity trends are jeopardizing UN global development goals to provide food, water, clothing, and housing. They also weaken natural defenses against extreme weather events, which will become more common due to climate change. Although the number of conservation areas has increased, most governments are failing to achieve the biodiversity targets set at the 2010 UN conference in Aichi, Japan. In the Americas, only 20% of key biodiversity areas are protected. The authors urged an end to subsidies for agriculture and energy that are encouraging unsustainable production. The European Union's support for fishing was among those cited for criticism. Watson also urged people to switch to a more sustainable diet, less beef, more chicken and vegetables, and waste less food, water, and energy. Yes, grow your own food, cook your own food, stop wasting food. Just pay attention to what you buy at the store, how much packaging is included, how much pre-production is involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are glimmers of hope in Northern Asia. Forest cover has increased by more than 22% as a result of tree planting programs, mostly in China. But this was from a very low base and with far fewer species than in the past. In Africa, there has been a partial recovery of some species, though there is still a long way to go. Watson, a former chair of the IPCC and a leading figure in the largely successful campaign to reduce the gases that were causing a hole in the ozone layer, said the biodiversity report was the most comprehensive since 2005 and the first of its type that involved not just scientists, but governments and other stakeholders. Despite the grim outlook, he said there was cause for hope. The report outlines several different future paths, depending on the policies adopted by governments and the choices made by consumers. None completely halt biodiversity loss, excuse me, but the worst case scenarios can be avoided with greater conservation efforts. Excuse me. The missing link is to involve policymakers across government and to accept that biodiversity affects every area of the economy. Currently, these concerns are widely accepted by foreign and environmental ministries, losing vocal ability. The challenge is to move the debate to incorporate this in other areas of government, such as agriculture, energy, and water. Businesses and individual consumers also need to play a more responsible role, said Watson. We don't make recommendations because governments don't like being told what to do, and so instead we give them options, he said. The IPBES report will be used to inform decision makers at a major UN conference later this year. Signatories to the Convention for Biodiversity will meet in Sharm el-Sheikh in November to discuss ways to raise targets and strengthen compliance. There have been more than 140 scientific reports since 1977, almost all of which have warned of deterioration of the climate or natural world. Without more pressure from civil society, media, and voters, governments have been reluctant to sacrifice short-term economic goals to meet the longer-term environmental challenge to human well-being. Biodiversity is under serious threat in many regions of the world, and it is time for policymakers to take action on national, regional, and global levels, said Jose Graziano da Silva, Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization. Others have put the crisis in starker terms. Biologist Paul Ehrlich has warned that civilizational collapse is a near certainty in the next few decades due to the destruction of the natural world. And that is about going to wrap it up for this video. I'm going to come back with another one, but I just wanted to say consumerism is driving all of this destruction. And on the demand side, population is driving a lot of this destruction. So two basic things we can do to stop the destruction of the earth are have fewer babies and use less things, and need less things, require less things in our lives in order to be happy. Some of this takes a lot of work, internal work as a human being on this planet, to try and use less things, to see how you are contributing to the destruction of the planet by your use of resources and products, and gasoline and guns and bullets and everything that we need to live on this planet are not necessary. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to do all the things all at once. In fact, I highly recommend that you don't, but start little by little to look at yourself and look at what it is you're doing, and look at what people around you are doing, and have conversations with people. This is how we start the process. I will be back shortly. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. Peace.